Have you ever been driving down the highway? Maybe you're running late for a meeting or just heading out on a long road trip, and you look out the window to see those massive, sprawling industrial
Yeah, the
parks?
ones that just seem to go on forever.
Exactly. Endless rows of concrete distribution centers that are literally the size of small towns.
Manufacturing plants humming away behind those huge chain link fences.
Right. And it is so easy to just drive right past them without giving them a second thought. I mean, they
Yeah.
just look like big gray
You
boxes.
really do.
But behind those gray walls and the loading docks, there lies a complex, invisible web of rules. It's mathematics and high-stakes economics.
Absolutely.
It's a system that completely dictates why that building is exactly where it is, how it was built, and most importantly, what makes it incredibly valuable.
That's right.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are thrilled you are joining us. Today, we're taking a stack of authoritative materials entirely dedicated to the world of industrial properties, and we are going to decode it for you.
I am really looking forward to this.
Our mission today is to demystify the commercial real estate world. We're going to translate these dense zoning laws, the environmental regulations, and the market economics into a highly readable, completely fascinating playbook of how the physical world of commerce actually operates.
It is a great mission. And I'm very much looking forward to unpacking this with you. Because when you look at these technical real estate concepts, things that might seem um, quite dry on the surface,
Yeah, like setback requirements.
right, or provincial policy statements,
Yeah.
they are actually the DNA of our economy.
Yeah.
Everything we consume, everything we use spends time in one of these property.
It's so true. Every single thing we buy.
Exactly. I'm excited to connect these very specific physical building requirements to the broader economic picture. We're going to look at how global interest rates, human demographics, and even the simple need for a lunchroom all intersect on a single plot of industrial land.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the very beginning. Before a massive warehouse even exists, before the concrete is even poured, it is just a piece of dirt.
Just raw land.
Just dirt. But how does that dirt become an industrial powerhouse? Looking at the framework we have, it all starts with what I like to call the invisible architecture.
Planning and zoning.
Yes, planning and zoning. We are looking at the Provincial Planning Act, along with municipal zoning bylaws and official plans. Now, for anyone who follows commercial development, you know these aren't just suggestions.
No, definitely not.
They are the absolute law of the land, determining location, use, and restrictions on industrial activities. But I always wonder about the rigidity here. I mean, why not let the free market dictate where a factory goes if a developer buys the land fair and square?
That is the classic tension in real estate development, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
The developer's vision versus the municipal master plan. But it's crucial to understand why these rules exist in such a rigid format. The core principle here is land use compatibility.
Compatibility, right?
The guidelines emphasize that industrial zones and residential or retail zones simply must be kept apart. They achieve this through the use of buffer zones.
Buffer zones.
Right. Think about the reality of industrial operations. You might have transport trucks arriving at 2 in the morning.
Yeah, heavy machinery vibrating the ground.
Exactly. Or exhaust from manufacturing processes.
Yeah.
You absolutely cannot have that sitting right next door to a suburban neighborhood or a high-end retail development.
People would go crazy.
The friction would be immediate and constant.
Right, so the buffer zone is essentially the bouncer at the club, keeping the heavy metal band away from the quiet reading room.
That is a great way to put it.
It makes logistical sense. You can't have a stamping press sending shockwaves through the bedrock into someone's living room. But even once an investor actually secures an appropriately zoned industrial lot, they can't just pave the whole thing over and build a monolith.
No, they certainly cannot.
This is where we get into the building requirements. And honestly, the spatial mathematics here dictate the entire financial viability of a project. We have to talk about the building envelope.
The invisible rectangle.
Yes, it is literally an invisible rectangle on the property created by applying setback requirements.
And since we know our listeners are familiar with the basic concept of setbacks.
The mandatory minimum distances from the property line.
Exactly. What we really need to focus on is how those setbacks interact with municipal coverage limits to create that envelope.
Right.
The reason this invisible rectangle is the most important concept for an industrial buyer is that the value of an industrial lot is based almost entirely on the price per square foot of buildable area.
Not the total acreage of the dirt itself.
Precisely. Just the buildable area.
Let's visualize the math here because it serves as a brutal reality check for a lot of new investors.
It really does.
Imagine a buyer looking at a 2.5-acre lot. Let's say it costs $280,000 per acre.
Okay, so that brings the total land cost to $700,000.
Right. They might look at that lot, which is roughly the size of 2 football fields, and think they have a massive canvas to build on.
They see endless possibilities.
But then the municipal zoning bylaws step in. Let's say the bylaw for this specific lot permits a maximum of 35% coverage.
Which is a very common and very restrictive reality in industrial zoning.
Extremely common. So out of those 2.5 acres, which is just shy of 109,000 square feet.
Because there are 43,560 square feet in an acre.
Thank you, yes. Out of that roughly 109,000 square feet, they can only actually build on 35% of it.
Wow.
They have to mentally erase over half of the land they just purchased. Their actual buildable land area shrinks down to exactly 38,115 square feet.
That is a massive reduction.
That 38,000 square feet is their actual revenue-generating footprint.
And that number is the true asset. They paid $700,000, but the size of the factory or warehouse they can lease out is strictly capped by that envelope.
And it gets worse.
It does, because it gets even tighter. Other operational necessities ruthlessly eat into that buildable area. Parking requirements, for example.
Yes,
They are mandated based on the size and use of the building. You typically see this calculated as a specific number of spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area.
And we can't forget outside storage.
Right.
If the business needs an outdoor yard to store pallets or raw steel or a fleet of vehicles, that facility on a lot further reduces the area you can use for the main building.
It becomes this high-stakes, zero-sum game of spatial mathematics.
It really is zero-sum.
Every single square foot dedicated to a parking space is a square foot you cannot lease out as warehouse space.
It absolutely is. You have developers constantly trying to thread the needle, negotiating with municipalities for minor variances, just to squeeze an extra 1,000 square feet of warehouse space out of a lot without violating the parking ratios.
It's a constant battle.
Yeah.
And this brings us to a really critical transition. We've been looking inward at the math of the lot itself, but no industrial property exists in a vacuum.
No.
The planning framework places a very heavy emphasis on what happens when these industrial zones inevitably clash with other types of land.
Yes, the concept of sensitive land use.
Right.
The documentation makes it abundantly clear that municipal land use provisions have to be consistent with broader provincial policy statements.
These are high-level guidelines dictating the development and use of sensitive lands.
But what actually qualifies as sensitive in the eyes of the province? I mean, what are we talking about here?
What's fascinating here is how broad yet specific the definition of sensitive land truly is. We are talking about places where people or ecosystems are highly vulnerable to disruptions.
Okay, like what?
This includes parks, educational facilities, healthcare facilities, residential properties, and wildlife areas. The provincial policy demands the creation of safe and healthy communities.
Safe and healthy.
This is a proactive mandate. It states that any development capable of causing environmental or public health concerns simply must be avoided or rigorously buffered.
Avoided entirely.
The goal is to prevent adverse effects entirely, rather than just mitigating them after the fact. And those effects are specified very clearly.
Odor, noise, vibrations, and airborne contaminants.
Exactly.
It is wild to think about a municipal planner looking at a topographical map and realizing they have to account for the prevailing wind direction to ensure an exhaust vent from a paint facility doesn't blow toward a high school 3 miles away.
It takes an incredible amount of foresight.
But it's not just about protecting the residential areas from the industry. Sometimes the regulations are designed to protect vital transportation hubs from the residents.
That is a huge point.
We see specific, intense attention given to airports, rail, and marine facilities.
Yes, because these are massive, irreplaceable economic drivers. The guidelines state that land uses close to these major facilities must be planned based on their long-term protection and economic role.
Right. Their economic role is the priority.
Think of a major international airport. You cannot have an airport severely restrict its operating hours, limit its cargo capacity, or alter its flight paths just because a developer decided to build a new subdivision a mile away.
And now the homeowners are complaining about the jet noise.
Exactly. The airport is a critical piece of prudential infrastructure. Its economic utility supersedes the desire for residential development in that specific footprint.
The rule they outline for airports is incredibly strict and definitive. New residential development and redevelopment are strictly prohibited near airports if the noise level is above 30 noise exposure forecast.
Or NEF.
Right, NEF.
The noise exposure forecast is a brilliant piece of regulatory metric. It doesn't just measure how loud a single jet is.
It's more complex than that.
Much more. It calculates the cumulative noise energy from aircraft operations, accounting for different types of aircraft, the frequency of flights, the specific flight paths, and critically, the time of day.
Time of day matters a lot.
A cargo plane taking off at 3 a.m. is weighted much heavier in the NEF calculation than a passenger jet taking off at noon.
Because people are sleeping.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anything above that 30 NEF line is deemed completely fundamentally unsuitable for residential living.
By enforcing that strict buffer, the province essentially draws a line in the sand. They ensure the airport can continue to operate and expand as a critical transportation corridor without being bogged down by constant noise complaints and legal battles with neighboring communities.
It's proactive.
It is a preemptive strike against AMBism, not in my backyard, by simply making the backyard illegal to build in the first place.
Precisely. So we have this intense, multi-layered regulatory framework shaping the land, dictating exactly where the dirt can be turned and what can be built on it. But that begs the fundamental question of market participation.
Right. What actually drives someone to go through all this bureaucratic friction, this spatial math, and this intense zoning scrutiny to buy an industrial space?
A lot of work.
Who are the players navigating this maze? Let's look at the economic engine behind this. The landscape really breaks the buyers down into two main categories.
Investors and users.
Investors and users. And their motivations couldn't be more different.
The distinction is absolutely vital to understanding how the market moves. Investors are looking at the property purely as a financial vehicle.
They just want the return.
They are completely agnostic to what is actually happening inside the building, as long as it is legal and profitable. They want large, credit-worthy tenants who will sign long-term triple net leases.
Okay, break that down for us.
Their primary concern is the return on investment, capital appreciation, and minimizing financial risk. They want a tenant who will pay the rent reliably for a decade so the investor can collect the predictable cash flow and eventually sell the asset at a lower capitalization rate.
So they're essentially buying a cash flow stream.
Yes.
Users, on the other hand, are the businesses themselves. A user seeks out an investor to lease from or buys the property themselves to fund their own real estate needs.
They need the physical space.
They want the space so they can actually manufacture their specific goods, assemble their products, or store their inventory. Their focus is entirely on the operational utility of the building.
Form and function.
Does it have enough power? Are the floors thick enough to support our CNC machines? Is the ceiling high enough for our racking system?
And both of these groups, despite their different motivations, are completely at the mercy of macroeconomic forces. The framework explicitly highlights the massive overriding impact of interest rates.
Cost of money.
It points out that the industrial market is uniquely sensitive to the cost of capital, which drives borrowing capacity, property prices, and overall supply and demand.
Let's break down how that actually plays out in the real world. High interest rates mean borrowing money is expensive.
Simple enough.
If an investor was looking to buy a $10 million distribution center and the interest rate on their commercial mortgage jumps from 4% to 7%, their debt service costs explode.
The monthly payments skyrocket.
The math simply stops working. This results in an immediate slowdown of the industrial market. Buyers pull back, development stalls because construction loans are too expensive, and property prices inevitably have to soften to meet the new reality of expensive debt.
Conversely, low interest rates act like rocket fuel for the industrial market.
Cheap money.
Borrowing is cheap, which increases demand from both investors looking for yield and users looking to expand their operations. More money chases the same limited supply of properly zoned industrial land, driving up property prices across the board.
It is a delicate seesaw. And layered on top of those global interest rates are local and federal government policies.
Yes, the policy levers.
We see a myriad of policy levers affecting this space. Taxation, environmental regulations, health and safety standards, employment standards, access to markets, and waste disposal rules.
Every single one matters.
Every single one of those policy levers can make an industrial property more or less profitable. If a municipality suddenly increases commercial property taxes by 15%, the investor's net operating income drops, and the value of the building drops right along with it.
Or consider waste disposal. If environmental regulations tighten regarding industrial runoff, a manufacturing user might have to invest $500,000 into a new on-site water filtration system just to stay compliant.
Just to keep their doors open.
That policy change directly impacts their bottom line and their desire to stay in that specific jurisdiction.
Speaking of factors that impact a user's desire to locate in a specific jurisdiction, the framework dives into a factor that is often overlooked in pure real estate analysis:
Demographics.
demographics.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, an industrial building is just an empty, silent shell without a human workforce to operate it.
It's just concrete.
The guidance for commercial professionals advises that they must be intimately familiar with the general demographics of an area: average age, income levels, educational background, ethnic origin, and language.
I found the language aspect particularly interesting. Why does the language spoken in a specific municipality matter to a company building a warehouse?
Think about workforce training and operational safety. If you are a multinational logistics company setting up a facility that requires 1,000 floor workers, and you are locating in an area with a massive demographic of new immigrants who primarily speak a specific language, your middle management, your safety manuals, and your training protocols all have to adapt to that demographic reality to run efficiently and safely.
That makes total sense. You have to communicate effectively to run a warehouse.
The availability of suitable employees in a particular area is hugely affected by these demographic factors. If you are setting up a highly specialized automated manufacturing plant, say, producing aerospace components,
Very high tech.
you need a local demographic with a high educational background in robotics, engineering, and advanced machining. You can build the most beautiful factory in the world, but if you build it in an area where the workforce doesn't have those skills, the factory's useless.
It's a fascinating layer of analysis. The economic dynamic they describe regarding the local workforce is brilliantly simple, but dictates so much corporate strategy.
It really does.
They note that in a strong, booming economy, businesses have to fiercely compete for staff. Skilled workers have choices, they have leverage,
Right, they can demand more.
they demand higher wages, better benefits, and better working conditions. But in a weak economy, unemployment increases, and businesses find it very easy to fill vacancies at lower wage points.
Which means an industrial buyer has to look at the local employment rate and wage growth, not just as abstract economic data, but as a key leading indicator of their future operating expenses.
It's part of the pro forma.
If they are moving into a market with 3% unemployment, they're going to bleed cash trying to attract and retain talent.
And once you have the staff trained and the building humming, you have to actually move your goods in and out. The framework heavily stresses the importance of transportation corridors.
It's the lifeblood of logistics.
Industrial operations need unobstructed access to highways, railways, canals, and waterways. The math here is simple, but brutal. Shorter distances, transportation corridors mean competitive freight rates, which results in reduced costs and increased profits.
Think about the fuel and labor costs of a single transport truck.
Okay.
If your warehouse is 30 minutes away from the nearest major highway interchange, down congested local roads with dozens of traffic lights, every single truck you dispatch wastes an hour of time and fuel just getting to the highway and back.
An hour per truck.
Multiply that by 50 trucks a day over a 10-year lease. The financial bleed is astronomical.
It adds up.
A warehouse located 5 minutes from an interchange, even if the rent is significantly higher, is exponentially more valuable because the logistics savings far outweigh the real estate premium.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's shift gears. Let's say you own one of these highly desirable industrial properties near a highway and you want to sell it.
You want to cash out.
The market is hot and you want to maximize your return. The framework we are exploring provides what is essentially a seller's playbook for artificially increasing the value of the property before putting it on the market.
Yes, the value-added opportunities.
These are strategic physical hacks to maximize utility and appeal to buyers, thereby driving up the ultimate sale price. But as with everything in commercial real estate, they come with caveats.
Always caveats.
Exactly. The first one they list is creating a mezzanine.
This is a smart one.
If the clear height, the ceiling height inside the warehouse permits it, Adding a mezzanine floor instantly adds usable square footage to the existing office area without expanding the building envelope we talked about earlier.
It is a brilliant loophole.
Mm.
Because you aren't changing the footprint of the building on the land, you aren't violating your setback requirements or your maximum lot coverage percentage.
You're just building up inside.
You are simply utilizing the empty vertical space.
Mm.
You can use it for extra office space, a break room, or lightweight storage. Suddenly, a 20,000 square foot building is marketed as having 22,000 square feet of usable space.
Another massive value add is increasing the electrical capacity. If an investor wants to attract a heavy manufacturing tenant, that tenant needs serious power. Upgrading the electrical service before a sale is a huge selling feature. But the guidelines strictly note that a licensed electrical engineer must be consulted to confirm it is even possible. You can't just call a residential electrician to run a thicker wire from the street.
Which highlights the immense technical complexity of these buildings.
Yeah.
You're dealing with massive industrial power grids, three-phase power, transformers, and municipal grid capacities.
It's infrastructure level.
If the local substation is already maxed out, you simply cannot upgrade the capacity of your building no matter how much money you are willing to spend. The local grid dictates your ceiling.
They also suggest adding parking spaces as a value add. But again, there's a major catch. You have to verify if more spaces can legally be added in compliance with those municipal requirements we discussed.
You can't just pave the grass.
If you pave over a patch of grass to add 5 parking spots, you might inadvertently violate your minimum landscaped open space requirement, triggering a zoning violation.
And finally, there are the simple cosmetic upgrades that shouldn't be overlooked. Installing a high-quality security fence, improving the interior lighting by switching to high-efficiency LEDs, or just slapping on a fresh coat of paint and epoxy on the warehouse floor.
The shiny floors always look good.
These sound minor, but they completely change the psychological impression a buyer gets when they walk through the door.
While those physical upgrades are great for marketing brochures, the framework takes a very serious, almost grim turn when it addresses the heavy reality of environmental risk.
This is where deals die.
Before an industrial property is even listed for sale, it is strongly recommended that the seller obtains specific reports. And it is vital to distinguish between the two main types they discuss: the building inspection report and the environmental site condition report.
They serve completely different functions and carry entirely different levels of existential risk for the deal.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The building inspection report is somewhat similar to what you would get when buying a residential house, just scaled up. It includes a visual inspection of the roof, the HVAC systems, the foundation, a review of relevant maintenance documents, the identification of physical deficiencies, and photographs.
The documentation makes a crucial point here. Any physical deficiencies identified by the building inspector are considered material facts. Any significant deferred maintenance issues must be appropriately addressed or disclosed.
Let's define material fact because it is a vital legal term in real estate. A material fact is something that would reasonably affect a buyer's decision to purchase the property or the price they're willing to pay.
It changes the math.
A leaking roof on a 100,000 square foot warehouse is not a minor inconvenience. It is a massive material fact because replacing that roof could cost $1 million. If a seller knows about it, they have to disclose it.
But the second report, the environmental site condition report, is where the real anxiety lies in commercial real estate.
Terrifying amounts of anxiety.
A bad roof can be fixed with a checkbook, but an environmental disaster, that can ruin a company. This report confirms whether or not there is evidence of contamination on the site. And in the industrial world, contamination is the ultimate deal killer.
The rules surrounding environmental disclosures and incident reporting are intense and unforgiving. The framework outlines that owners absolutely must report any environmental incident, like a chemical spill, and any subsequent remedial work to the Ministry of Environment, Conservation, and Parks.
Specifically, pollution and spills must be reported immediately to the Spills Action Center and the local municipality.
Immediate reporting.
And you don't just report that it happened. You have to tell them exactly what action you, as the owner, have taken to mitigate and clean up the situation.
The level of oversight is staggering. The environmental authority actively documents the information, tracks the cleanup activity, checks for health impacts, and coordinates with other agencies.
They aren't messing around.
They don't just take your word for it that you swept up the chemical powder. And here's a detail that should send a shiver down the spine of any negligent property owner.
Yeah, this part is wild.
The actual address of the property and the owner's name can literally be added to the Environmental Registry of Ontario if significant environmental issues are revealed during an inspection or an incident.
It is the ultimate public shaming and financial penalty combined. Your property and your corporate name placed on a publicly searchable government registry of contaminated sites.
A blacklist.
That stigma would completely tank the value of the property. Lenders will refuse to finance it, buyers will refuse to touch it, and the owner is left holding a toxic, illiquid asset.
Which is exactly why the guidance emphasizes documented remediation. If there was a spill 5 years ago and it was properly cleaned up to environmental standards, the real estate professional must obtain every single document, test result, and sign-off relating to that environmental condition from the seller.
The paper trail has to be perfect.
The seller has an absolute non-negotiable obligation to disclose these incidents and the subsequent remediation reports to potential buyers.
The framework invokes the Code of Ethics here, which is standard across real estate governing bodies. It dictates that professionals must treat every person in a transaction fairly, honestly, and with integrity.
In the industrial context, that means disclosing material facts, like a history of underground storage tanks or chemical spills, at the earliest practical opportunity.
You cannot hide a buried environmental disaster and hope the buyer's inspector misses it.
The liability tail on environmental contamination is incredibly long and pierces the corporate veil.
Okay, so we've seen how complex it is to prepare one of these properties for sale, the physical hacks to increase value, and the terrifying environmental liabilities that must be managed.
It's a minefield.
But taking a step back, how do companies even manage the massive capital required to operate in these spaces in the first place? I mean, tying up tens of millions of dollars in concrete and land when you are trying to run a fast-paced manufacturing or logistics business seems incredibly burdensome.
It is a huge burden.
The materials outline some fascinating advanced real estate maneuvers to handle this capital trap. Let's talk about the sale-leaseback arrangement.
This is an incredibly common and ingenious financial strategy in the corporate world, particularly for mature companies. In a sale-leaseback, a company that currently owns its facility outright sells that property to an institutional investor like a pension fund or a real estate investment trust.
Right.
But simultaneously, at the exact moment of the sale, the company signs a long-term ironclad contract to lease the property right back from the new owner.
So they sell the building they're actively working in and just stay there and start paying rent to a new landlord. On the surface, if you don't understand corporate finance, that sounds like a company in distress selling off the family silver. Why would a healthy company do that?
It is all about liquidity and the velocity of capital. Think about a successful manufacturing firm. Their core competency is making widgets, not managing real estate.
Right, they aren't property managers.
For over 20 years, they have built up $20 million of equity trapped in the bricks, mortar, and land of their facility. That equity is sitting dead.
It's just locked up in the concrete.
By executing a sale-leaseback, the seller liquidates that equity. They get a massive, immediate injection of cash, which they can now deploy into their actual business operations.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
They can fund research and development, acquire a competitor, expand their product lines, or pay down high-interest corporate debt. They unlock the capital, but because of the simultaneous lease, their operations aren't disrupted for a single minute. The assembly line keeps moving.
It is a phenomenal maneuver. And from the buyer's perspective, the institutional investor, they are buying a commercial building that already comes with a guaranteed long-term tenant who is deeply committed to the location.
It's a safe bet.
The tenant is usually responsible for all taxes, insurance, and maintenance under a triple net lease. The investor gets what is essentially a corporate bond wrapped in real estate. They are assured of long-term passive cash flows.
It is a brilliant financial engineering tactic. The source materials even note that sometimes the seller will negotiate an option to buy the property back again once the lease is over, if they anticipate having excess capital in the future.
Another advanced maneuver we need to discuss is the design-build arrangement. This typically happens in a seller's market, which the framework defines as a scenario where the demand for land is very high, but the existing space available for lease or purchase is extremely limited.
Land is scarce.
So, if a rapidly growing company cannot find an existing warehouse that fits their highly specific needs, maybe they need 50-foot clear heights for an automated retrieval system, and nothing on the market has more than 30 feet, they turn to a design build.
They build from scratch.
The owner of a vacant piece of land, or a developer, agrees to build a custom structure based on the exact size, construction quality, and design required by this specific tenant. And in return, the tenant signs a massive long-term lease before the first shovel even hits the dirt.
This is an incredibly complex, multi-year process. It is not like leasing a standard office suite.
No, not at all.
The guidance emphasizes the massive role of commercial brokerages in facilitating these deals. Brokers don't just find the land. They perform exhaustive, detailed analyses of the user's operational needs, building requirements, and site criteria.
They are acting as consultants.
They have to prepare deep cost estimates covering everything from land acquisition and raw construction costs to interim financing, permanent loan costs, architectural fees, closing expenses, and massive contingencies for delays.
And central to all of this is the creation of a pro forma statement. This is the document that makes or breaks the deal. The text defines this as a projected or estimated financial statement that presents a reasonably accurate idea about the financial situation if present trends continue and certain assumptions hold true.
It projects cash flows, present value estimates, and internal rates of return over the next 10 or 20 years.
But the key phrase there is if certain assumptions hold true. The pro forma is essentially a financial crystal ball used to convince the developer's lenders and the tenant's board of directors that this custom build makes financial sense.
But what happens if the assumptions are wrong?
Exactly.
What if the pro forma assumes construction materials will cost X, but a global supply chain crisis makes them cost 3 times X? What if the assumed exit capitalization rate in 10 years is wildly optimistic? The entire financial house of cards can collapse.
Which is why the due diligence phase is so agonizingly thorough. The framework outlines a very structured, staged process for a design build. It starts with tenant qualification, the developer making absolutely sure the business is financially solid enough to commit to a 20-year lease before they pour custom concrete.
So you check the credit.
Then preliminary qualification of the site, followed by meetings with the developer and architects. Then comes a detailed proposal, formal presentation, acceptance, and finally, relentless follow-up throughout the multi-year construction phase. It requires immense trust and coordination.
Speaking of due diligence, that leads us perfectly into the buyer's perspective. If you are an investor or a user going out into the market to buy one of these properties, the quest is exhausting. First, you have to actually find the properties. And in commercial real estate, that isn't always as simple as checking an app on your phone.
Exactly. The commercial market is notoriously opaque. The materials mention several specific resources for sourcing industrial information, looking specifically at Ontario as an example. The Ontario Investment Service, the Ontario Investment and Trade Center, and the Ontario Real Estate Association.
And major hubs.
But it also explicitly states a truth known to every commercial broker. The best properties might not even be on the local listing service. Networking with other commercial brokerages, tracking down off-market deals, and cold calling owners is highlighted as a vital tool.
Finding the property is just step one. Then you have to match it to the buyer's specific needs, which, as we discussed earlier, vary wildly depending on whether they are an investor or a user.
Wreck the two camps again.
Investors are focused on return on investment, financial risk profiles, and the creditworthiness of the tenants. They care much less about the specific location or whether the building has a specific type of loading dock, as long as it generates yield.
It's a spreadsheet to them.
But for user buyers, the investigative process is intensely granular. Salespersons must obtain as much information as possible about the specific business operations. The physical requirements of a frozen food warehousing operation versus a heavy steel manufacturing plant are entirely different species of real estate.
The documentation points out a really cool, often underutilized resource for buyers trying to understand a new market: local economic development offices.
These are great.
These municipal offices can provide vital, on-the-ground intelligence that you won't find in a standard real estate listing. They have details on local demographic trends, prevailing wage rates, labor union density, and upcoming transportation infrastructure projects.
They know the town inside and out.
They can even help the buyer secure financial services, explain local tax structures, and point out municipal incentives or tax abatements designed specifically to attract businesses to their town.
They're essentially the sales team for the municipality.
Yeah.
But all of that research, all of that networking, culminates in the most critical, high-stress phase of the purchase: due diligence to identify risk.
Here we go.
The guidance expects commercial real estate professionals to obtain a mountain of documentation from the seller to verify that the property meets every single expectation before any binding agreement is signed. I like to view the guidelines here as the 4 pillars of due diligence.
Let's walk through those pillars because skipping any one of them is a recipe for bankruptcy. The first is financial and operational due diligence.
The numbers.
This involves scrutinizing the seller's income statements, balance sheets, bank statements, rent rolls, lease contracts, tax bills, employee records, and every microscopic detail of their operating expenses. You are essentially auditing the building's financial health to ensure the seller isn't inflating their net operating income.
The second pillar is legal due diligence. This requires a meticulous, exhaustive analysis of the title search, looking for hidden assets and liabilities, outstanding mortgages, liens, or other encumbrances on the property.
It goes deep.
It includes reviewing land surveys to ensure the fence is actually on the property line, auditing operating licenses, service contracts, permits, and confirming absolute zoning compliance.
I want to highlight the permit aspect because a lot of people don't realize the severity of this. What is the big deal if a minor building permit from 10 years ago is missing from the file?
If a permit is missing for an addition or a structural change, the buyer inherits a legal nightmare. The municipality can literally force the new owner to tear down that unpermitted addition at their own expense, or pay massive fines and undertake expensive engineering studies to retroactively permit it.
So you buy the problem.
You inherit the previous owner's illegal shortcuts.
That is terrifying. Pillar number 3 is structural due diligence. We touched on this earlier. The visual building inspection to identify physical deficiencies and review maintenance documentation. If you are buying a 40-year-old warehouse, you need structural engineers to confirm the roof joists aren't slowly failing under snow loads.
It's vital.
And the fourth pillar is environmental due diligence. Buyers are strongly advised to hire professional environmental engineers to physically test the site, take core samples of the soil, test the groundwater, and determine the presence of any hazards or contaminants. You absolutely cannot take the seller's word that the site is clean.
And beyond those 4 pillars of the specific property, the buyer must assess broader market risks. The framework notes the risk of macroeconomic shifts, rising interest rates, slowdowns in industry-specific sales, or increase inventory carrying costs.
The big picture risks.
A sophisticated buyer must evaluate the broader market condition. They look at local vacancy rates, the availability of investment capital, increasing local competition, and the likelihood of major tenants relocating to cheaper jurisdictions.
Things change fast.
The financial climate can change rapidly due to sudden changes in government policy or global supply chains. A buyer has to attempt to forecast all of this over a 10-year hold period.
All right. We have covered the zoning architecture, the macroeconomic forces, the environmental landmines, and the massive due diligence process. I want to bring it all back down to the physical reality of the building itself. The final section of the materials provides a fascinating anatomy of an industrial building. It gets incredibly granular, and it shows how form strictly follows function.
It does, and it starts with a concept we briefly mentioned but need to explore: how you even physically get onto the property.
The driveway.
The text discusses access restrictions, and it points out a vital jurisdictional divide that catches a lot of developers off guard. Access to industrial properties from standard local roads is regulated by the local municipality.
Right, the town.
You apply for a curb cut permit, and usually it's a straightforward process. However, if the property needs access to a provincial highway, which is highly desirable for logistics,
Yeah.
that access is tightly regulated by completely different provincial legislation.
Namely, the Highway Traffic Act and the Public Transportation and Highway Act. So you might find the absolute perfect piece of land, perfectly zoned, perfectly flat, right next to a major highway. But if the Provincial Transportation Ministry denies your permit to build an access ramp or a dedicated turning lane onto that highway because of traffic flow concerns, the property is essentially useless for heavy logistics.
It kills the value.
The municipality might say yes, but the province can kill the deal.
Exactly. Once you are legally allowed to drive onto the lot, the physical requirements of the building itself are highly specific to the era and the user. We talked about lot size and how it is dictated by coverage restrictions. Then there is the building size itself, the gross floor area. But crucially, the framework highlights clear height.
Or the usable ceiling height. This is a huge shift in the industry right now. The text notes that specific industrial operations require exact clear heights.
E-commerce has changed this.
A massive e-commerce fulfillment center, for instance, requires clear heights of 36 to 40 feet or even higher to accommodate massive automated vertical racking systems. They are building the warehouse up, not just out.
Whereas an older light assembly plant from the 1980s might only have an 18-foot clear height, making it completely obsolete for modern logistics users.
And here is a metric that perfectly illustrates the intersection of human management and industrial scale, the office-to-plant ratio.
This is a strict rule.
The guidelines specify that the amount of office space within an industrial building is typically restricted by zoning bylaws to be somewhere between 15% and 20% of the total gross floor area.
That's right.
I always found this fascinating. If I own a 100,000 square foot building and I want to put 50,000 square feet of beautiful corporate office space inside it for my management team, why does the city care? Why restrict it to 15%?
Because of the strain on municipal infrastructure.
Oh, infrastructure.
Industrial zones are engineered for machines and goods, not high-density human populations. Think about the parking. A warehouse might only need 50 employees per shift. A 50,000 square foot corporate office needs 300 employees.
Meaning you need 300 parking spots, which the lot doesn't have.
Think about the plumbing and sewage. The pipes running to an industrial park are not designed for hundreds of office workers flushing toilets at the same time.
Right.
Think about the rush hour traffic. By strictly enforcing that 15% to 20% ratio, the municipality ensures the industrial park remains industrial and doesn't morph into a high-density corporate campus that overwhelms the local infrastructure.
That makes perfect sense. It is all about density control. Now, moving from the office to the warehouse floor, we have to talk about the doors. The taxonomy of doors in these documents paints such a vivid picture of how these buildings function as massive machines for moving goods.
They're like valves on an engine.
They list 6 distinct types of industrial doors, and choosing the wrong one can ruin a logistics flow. Let me run through them. First, you have your standard overhead doors.
Manual or automatic doors made of sections that fold upwards along tracks, similar to a residential garage door but on a massive scale.
Then you have roller doors,
which roll completely up into a cylinder at the top and out of the way, which are great for preventing accidents because there are no tracks hanging down.
Those are your standard access points. But the true operational heart of the building is the specialized loading infrastructure.
Exactly. The gold standard for logistics is the dock high door.
This door is elevated, usually around 4 feet off the ground, specifically to match the height of a standard tractor-trailer bed.
The truck backs right up to it, the dock leveler bridges the gap, and forklifts can drive straight from the flat warehouse floor directly into the back of the 18-wheeler. It is seamless.
But contrast that with the drive-in door.
This is a massive door at ground level,
allowing vehicles or large heavy machinery to literally drive from the parking lot straight into the building.
And this is where users pull their hair out. If you lease a building with only drive-in doors, but your business relies on unloading 50 18-wheelers a day, you are in deep trouble.
You can't use standard forklifts efficiently.
You have to unload the trucks outside in the yard and carry the pallets inside. It destroys operational efficiency.
For truly massive logistical operations, you might have a rail door.
This is a specialized side-loading door that provides direct access to railroad tracks running alongside the building, allowing you to load and unload bulk freight directly from train cars.
The existence of a rail door completely changes the economic viability of a regional distribution center. And finally, the ramp door,
which features a built-in concrete or steel ramp transitioning from the ground level up to the elevated dock level, offering a hybrid solution.
6 different doors, each serving a highly specific, uncompromising operational need.
This raises an important question, though. We're describing these buildings as massive, highly engineered machines for moving goods. But human beings have to operate these machines.
Right, the workers.
The source materials finish by addressing the human element inside this industrial envelope, and the contrast in how it's regulated is striking.
Yes, addressing basic human needs. The text notes that the number of bathrooms required in an industrial building is not arbitrary. It is strictly legally determined by the provincial building code, and the formula is based entirely on the total size of the building and the anticipated occupancy load.
You cannot skimp on the plumbing.
But here is the surprising fact that really stuck with me regarding employee welfare. Lunchrooms are completely optional.
It's a profound juxtaposition in regulatory philosophy. The municipality will strictly mandate exactly how far your fence must be from the property line down to the inch. The
Yes.
province will dictate the exact noise decibel limits of your operations. The building code calculates your bathroom requirements to the decimal point to ensure sanitation. But the space where the warehouse workers actually sit down to eat their lunch during a 12-hour shift,
Gotcha.
the documentation explicitly states that, although not legally required, a lunch or break room is usually provided simply to offer a comfortable and sanitary space for employees. That vital human space is left entirely to the discretion, goodwill, and retention strategy of the employer.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed a long way today. We started with the invisible mathematics of the buildable area and the strict enforcement of municipal buffer zones. We navigated the high-stakes reality of environmental spills and the terrifying prospect of the environmental registry.
We covered a lot of ground.
We explored the complex financial gymnastics of sale leasebacks and design builds, and finally looked at the exact percentage of office space and the highly specific types of dock doors required to make the industrial world spin.
If we connect all these dots, the true takeaway is a profound appreciation for the hidden, staggering complexity of our built environment.
Staggering is the right word.
The next time you order a package online and it miraculously arrives at your door the next morning, or the next time you drive past one of those massive windowless concrete warehouses humming away off the highway, you will no longer just see a gray building.
You will see the invisible framework holding it up.
You will see the zoning bylaws that placed it there, the rigorous environmental risk assessments that cleared the dirt, the granular demographic studies that staffed it, and the complex global economic strategies that financed its construction. It is a highly choreographed, high-stakes dance of regulation, capital, and logistics.
It is truly the hidden machinery of our daily lives, hiding in plain sight.
I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on a tiny detail mentioned early in our source framework.
Oh, I like this.
The text briefly references adaptive reuse, the idea of redeveloping older, smaller industrial properties into incubator buildings for new, low-rent tenants. Consider the massive millions of square feet fulfillment centers being built today.
The giants.
As our economy continues to shift, as robotics and automation increase exponentially, and as logistics models inevitably evolve over the next 50 years, how many of today's hyper-specialized, purpose-built industrial giants, with their 40-foot clear heights, exact 15% office ratios, and dozens of dock-high doors, will eventually become obsolete?
That is a fascinating question.
And more importantly, what wildly different, unimaginable purposes might these colossal concrete shells serve for the next generation when they are inevitably forced into adaptive reuse?
That is a brilliant image to end on. From a bustling e-commerce logistics hub today to who knows what tomorrow. Maybe vertical farms, maybe massive server farms for artificial intelligence, or maybe something we haven't even invented yet.
We will have to wait and see.
Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack the hidden rules of the industrial landscape. We hope you enjoyed decoding this vital part of our world. Until next time, keep looking past the concrete and keep digging into the details. Goodbye.